Okay, well, with that, I guess we can go ahead and jump into it. Um, we have, I believe, a special guest on the call this evening from over at Hardshare IO, who is going to be talking about some of the new functionality and what it takes to stand up an instance of or a device, a hardware device array remotely. And Scott, are you with us, Ben?
Yes. Yeah,
Excellent. What's going on, man? It's good to have you on the show.
yes. Thanks for having me. I'm working on a system for sharing electronics devices in a time sharing kind of fashion with remote users called Hardshare. And relatively recently, Joey Hiller in this community and I set up a cube cell through the system so that you can use it remotely and uh, be within range of a Helium hotspot, and also just program on a cube cell device. And there are other electronics that I have attached to it. And I also have robots attached, incidentally. And so the basic idea is to take a lot of the principles from a data center cloud computing environment where you provision time on devices and to carry that over to distributed embedded devices. So just having users share a device from their home. So all the infrastructure that I built up manifests practically through a sandbox environment. So there's a page where you can get an editor. There's an example app here. Actually, this is the example code from the Helium docs website for KubeCell. There's just a single file editor here and a little terminal embedded, and there's a webcam showing the KubeCell device here. And so I'll share a link so anyone can try it after this call if you want. But basically, you could put in your device IDs here in the source code, and then you could push build in Flash, and there's a computer connected locally to the KubeCell where the code is built. I'm not putting in a device ID for this example, but just to show you, there's a platform.io there locally that can build and then would flash the device. There's also, in another link that I'll share in a moment, this VS Code embedded. So it's the same device, but you can get a full screen VS Code, and then you can, for example, navigate to main.cpp and so on. And so you'd also, when you're doing this, want to have a Helium console open up so you can see the packets being sent. But if you were not that interested in trying the KubeCell, or if it's busy, there are other devices attached. So for example, this is a LilyGo e-ink display that Joey Hiller is also hosting. Actually, Joey has these devices in a filing cabinet, but basically this will load with VS Code in a moment, but here's the webcam showing the LilyGo. Okay. And once we have VS Code, it's not entirely intuitive in this case, especially if you've not used VS Code before, but basically you can navigate to a terminal, which I'm doing entirely through my Android screen.
Right, and typically you're not going to be programming on your phone, using VS Code, but yeah.
So your experience might be a little cleaner than this.
Does someone have a mic open besides Scott here?
That's because he's typing.
Oh,
on Android.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that does make sense.
Hey, hopefully at least it's convincing for you that I'm doing all this. So there's a little example program that will oscillate the screen through dark and light. And so it does it every several seconds, and we see it happening on the webcam. And so maybe something happened, something with the serial. But because you have this remote access, you can then try to debug it yourself. But basically, here's the example code. And on your screen, it'll be a little easier to look at, but it's just a small C program. And so anyone can share their devices. Like I said, they're also robots. So this is not necessarily of interest to Helium. If you go to this rerobots website, then you can click around and go to sandboxes, and there are also some full-size robots available. So that's all I really had to present. There's some technology that I did not bring any slides to present, so it will be a little confusing if I just speak it, but I'll say that there is isolation between the remote user and your device, so you can have a little more confidence in sharing your hardware.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool, man. And this has come a long way because, and I know a lot of folks when we ran the IoT for Good contest, back, quite some time ago now, we're using Hardshare in order to enter the competition because you have, guaranteed Helium access on an actual, physical hardware device that you can code against. Now, back then, you didn't have the Visual Studio IDE integration. And that is super cool, man. That's some neat functionality right there, to be able to have that tied into a browser interface. And can we talk just a little bit about what you were saying? Like Joey is hosting these instances. So if someone else wants, like if say I wanted to stand up some devices, that's something that I could do and allow other people to use these, these boards.
Right. Yeah. There's a open source client. I'm going to send a link to the tutorial in the chat. So there's a tutorial for an ESP32 board, fairly basic, and Joey has set up the cube cell like I have in the demo, and really it's fairly general. The main challenge from an isolation perspective is that for some kinds of devices, I do not have a filter for the input. So the example for the robots is that when you send commands to the robot, it does not go directly to the robot, but actually it goes through a proxy, and I can decide whether your motion command actually reaches the device. But for the cube cell, it's not the filter. I'm not running the filter in this example, but I do have a serial filter that could be built out to inspect the packets, but it's not at this point for the cube cell. But so anyone can set this up. So if you have a device and you want to make it available, for example, you have a temperature sensor on it or a GPS sensor, and you have someone you're hacking on it with remotely, you just want to share it with the community, you can generate one of these links like I showed you and manage access through that. So someone can remotely try your device and then send packets over the hotspot within range.
Very cool.
Yeah, I can also present in another Hacks Hour, and I can bring some more slides. And
no, this is cool. I'm glad you were able to kind of jump in here, and because I know quite a few people in here probably haven't seen this before. I know a lot of people haven't seen the new, IDE integration that you have. So yeah, you're always welcome in Hacks, to come in and show off what you're working on, man. It's always great to have you in here. And does anyone have any questions for Scott while we have him here?
Yes, Mike does.
Okay, Mike.
So Scott, this is what I took away from what you just said. Like, if I'm a developer, but I don't have a hotspot and I don't have any sensors, I could use this platform to learn how to do that. If someone else was sharing their gateway and sensors, I could use this to learn how to do all this stuff without having my own hardware. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's not necessarily a selling point. It's just something that you can do. And is in fact, so the cube cell example that I showed you is from the Helium Docs tutorial. So in that sense, you could learn without having the hardware yourself.
Or if I'm collaborating with people on a project and I'm the only one with the hardware, this would allow them to work with me right on the hardware, correct?
That is correct.
Oh, awesome.
Or if you have an expensive ass sensor that, or sensor array that you're, writing the firmware on, and, you've got people located all over the world, working on this firmware, you don't have to have a unique copy of this hardware at every location. So,
oh, Travis, I thought you were going to say, and you wanted a way to recoup some of the cost of that sensor, you could charge people a little bit for access.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. I could see something like that happening as well. If you, or if you're designing a sensor and you want developers to be able to access that to, check it out, before to, run it through its courses before they actually order it. I think there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of use cases for Hardshare IO here, and what you guys are doing over there, Scott.
Well, I hear Hardshare IO and reRobot. Like what do those two words mean, and how do they relate to each other?
Yeah, so actually, I started working on it 4 years ago, because my background work is primarily in robotics, not in IoT or LoRaWAN. And so the technology initially was built around sharing robots. But then last year, Chris Meyer, who's not on the call, and Travis and I started to talk about doing this with devices for the Helium network. And so, so the concept of Hardshare actually predates this IoT, but it's just a more generic word that was introduced. And so one difference also is that rerobots is actually a system for using robots that I host. And so it's more like a traditional data center cloud computing where the owners of the computer are opaque mega corporations in some sense, and you get time on them. But Hardshare is about users being able to share their own device.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. Very cool.
So I'll keep sending links into the chat.
Awesome. Yeah. And, all of these links, I'll go ahead and grab these and mirror these over into the Hacks channel over on Discord as well. So they'll be accessible later on after the call. Very cool, man. Scott, I appreciate it. Cool stuff you got going on over there, man. Does anyone else have questions? Or I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cut anyone off.
I'll just second Travis. That's real cool. That's awesome stuff. That's real awesome.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, it's been great to bring on some users. Oh, sure. George?
Why didn't you guys go, instead of loading all of that and embedding everything in VS Code in a page, why didn't you guys do a plugin for VS Code? It would be much cleaner.
Yes, it would be cleaner. So I just started to work on it, but it's not to a point where I'm ready to share it. But you're right. Actually, this is a great question, which is how would anyone want to work on the system? So I will say that there's some users who want the somewhat rough but easy to use and access website that has everything in it. But the other case, which I think is perhaps better fit if you're doing hours of development, is the VS Code plugin. So all that's to say, we've not done it yet, but we do plan to do it. And you can be a beta tester.
There you go.
Got it. All right. Sounds good.
And one thing you have to keep in mind is that I think a lot of developers kind of take for granted is that getting an IDE and a tool chain and whatnot set up for a beginning developer isn't necessarily the easiest process. And when I can just poof, I have a full chain, a full instance in a browser by clicking a button, and I can get immediately into what I'm trying to work on the code. I think that goes a long way, especially in like the educational process. But yeah, VS Code plugin would be killer here. But another huge point that you have to understand, especially with LoRaWAN, is because it is regionally restricted by frequencies. If you're in a country that doesn't have support or doesn't have any Helium hotspots there, it becomes very difficult to develop and to test on real hardware. And using a system like this, that's why a lot of the entries in that IoT for Good contest were from India, where there was no Helium support, and they were able to enter this contest even though they were in a region that was not supported by the Helium network at that time. So that's very cool.
That's right. They were using Hardshare. At that time, the devices happened to be in Colorado.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you. Keeping in mind here, I'll put it out that I have no technical background or any knowledge or education in programming. With that being said, what I'm planning on doing with one of the hotspots I have coming in is there is a high school robotics team that every year, in order to be able to compete, they're looking for funds, they're fundraising. And what I was planning on doing was being able to give them a hotspot for a large percentage of what that brings in. With that being said as well, what you have just presented to everybody in the Zoom meeting, do you think that that could benefit a robotics team in some way if they're going to be getting involved with the Helium network and LoWAN? Do you think that's something that they might be interested in? I believe it's the VEX Robotics that they're, or I don't know if you're familiar with that. I don't know if this is okay.
Yeah, I'm not
Is there
deeply
any way
familiar with
that
it.
it'd be, pardon?
I'm not very familiar with it. I've come across the name before. I also know there's First Robotics and so on. So whether it would be useful, we might have to explore it more after the call. I think it depends on what you want to achieve. So you mentioned there's a minor, and what if the robot has some device that's sending LoRa WAN packets, then maybe it all makes sense to fit together. I think the use case that would fit the most in that context would be the students being distributed and they're sharing access to the robot along with some LoRaWAN devices. If it's not clear to me from what you said whether the students have LoRaWAN devices. You said you have a minor.
Yeah, I'd be setting up a network in the local area that we're at, and one of those hotspots, I would be really donating to them to help them, finance some of their trips. But also, if they're going to be getting into the Helium network, and just hearing what you're saying, and the programming they do, and there's some pretty smart kids on that team, and I was wondering if they could benefit from it with what they do, being that it's robotics they're working with.
Yeah, I think they could, and they can. So one advantage of the sandbox environment that's different from a plugin for VS Code is that you share a link with someone and they can use it and they get 15 minutes on it or however long, and at the end it's reset, so the device memory is erased. So then when they come back to it, it's like a new environment or a freshly available board without some kind of result from whoever used it before them. So for students, I've found it's very good for learning because it's some safe editor setup where they can play with the hardware or play with the robot and not be worried about damaging it or worried about how they're going to share it with someone else.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. That sounds like a great, wow, thank you.
Yeah, we can, so feel free to send me an email or find me on Discord, and we can, I think we can do this, but that could be a fit potentially for the students.
Fantastic.
Now, that being said, Scott, you also can get an account. If you needed more than 15-minute sessions, or if you,
right. Actually, you can change the amount. So when you're the person who owns the device, you can make it 1 hour. You can make it unlimited. You can enable or pause or these links. You have full control at that point. You can monitor who's using it.
Very cool.
So if I understand right, in this instance where you have a robotics club or class in the classroom, you develop one device and all of the members, they could develop one hardware device and then share it, with all of the different members of that group. And that way it becomes a very effective teaching tool. Am I understanding that right? So that would be, they could participate in getting the hardware up, and then they can share programming and experimenting on that basis, again, without any fear or worry.
Exactly.
Teenage egos are always sensitive anyway, so they want to make sure that it's developed and they look good before they publish it out. So cool, Scott. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. I will say, actually, I've already worked with students in high school and 6th grade. Actually, I did not work with them directly, but they're teachers who are using this. in robotics classes. And also, there's a makerspace in Connecticut that has an array of TT-Go boards that was teaching an intro LoRaWAN and Helium class, and they use this Hardshare to share access to the array. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had a picture of that up. Yeah,
Right,
man,
it's hard-
they did a really nice build out on it. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a full array of these boards. They have a camera showing it, and you can provision time on one. I did not really make it clear in my presentation, but that you can have more than one device backing the same URL. So if you have 5 people who go to the same URL, there'll be provision devices that are available from the array. So that's what Makerspace CT did.
Yeah, and they had a single camera and that was shooting down and then slicing like all of the displays off of all of a board array of 12 boards on per section, I guess. Yeah. Very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, I'll send a link to a photo. I'll find
Awesome. Yeah. Good deal, man. Good deal.
Oh, so this isn't software as a service. It's not platform as a service. Is this IoT? What's the abbreviation for this fancy cool thing?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear what you think the abbreviation should be. I think IoT as a service, or actually, I really struggled with this.
IoT development as a service?
Yeah. It's
Trademark
a great
that.
question.
Whatever you do, trademark that.
Yeah. Well, I need to get a trademark on Hardshare now, actually. Hopefully no one on the call is going to beat me to it. Yeah.
Really cool.